Now, if you look at the facts of this case, and this is something that most people are not familiar with, is that Stephen Pagonis, right after Tawana Brawley was found, and for factual purposes, let me go back and remind people that Tawana Brawley was living in Wappinger Falls, and on November 24th, 1987, she vanished and nobody knew where she was. She was found 4 days later near the former residence that she resided in, the Pavilion Complex. And at that time, she was smeared with feces. She had KKK and nigger and bitch and other words written on her. She was in a bag and she was unconscious. All of that's medically documented and documented by law enforcement. Anything to the contrary is a fallacy. That is a fact. They tried to administer ammonia to her, and if anybody tried one of these ammonia capsules, they will bring you right back. And the first time that they administered to her, she didn't do anything. And the second time that they administered to her, nothing happened. Now, if anybody thinks that you can play around with an ammonia capsule, I would suggest that you go out to your drugstore right now and get one and put it up on your nose, and I guarantee you'll go 40 feet up into the sky. But Tawana Brawley didn't move because she was clearly unconscious. They tested her. They gave her a rubbed sternum test where she was rubbed so hard, so much friction was rubbed against her body that if, in fact, she was faking, she would have disclosed that. She didn't come to. She was taken to the hospital on the 28th of November. And at that time, she was in clothing that was different from the clothing that she had on at the time that she was last seen. The clothing that she had on the 28th of November was virtually nothing. She had on some burnt out jeans that were cut short, and her backside was burnt out of those jeans, so you can see all of her private parts. And that's virtually all that she had on at that particular time. So it is clear nobody rationally maintains that something didn't happen to Tawana Brawley. Even the district attorney of Dutchess County testified in this trial that something happened to Tawana Brawley. The county executive at that time, Lucille Patterson of Dutchess County, said something happened to Tawana Brawley. So we've gone past that. Now there are some people who are still trying to run that, but even my most severe critics, you know, will at least give us that. Now, what really precipitated things was that 3 days after Tawana was found, on about December 2nd, 1987, a part-time police officer, Harry Chris, was found dead in his apartment. And prior to that, in fact, on November 28th, the day that Tawana was found, when questioned very briefly by a black police officer, because she was terrified by the white officers who first tried to interrogate her, she indicated that a white cop was involved. So here you have a white cop who lives in Wappinger Falls, the same town that she lives in, 3 days later, found dead, supposedly of a suicide. And so an interest began to develop in terms of whether there was some relationship between Harry Chris and Tawana Brawley. And then, as it turned out, Stephen Pagonis, who was with Harry Chris on the 28th, came forward and said, I was with Harry Chris on that date. He couldn't have been involved with Tawana Brawley. But the problem with that is that Tawana Brawley was missing for 4 days, from November 24th through November 28th, and he was only with Harry Chris from about 11:30 on Saturday. Tawana Brawley was found about 1:30 on Saturday, and at 11:30, when Harry Chris and Pagonis was together, Pagonis stated that Harry Chris, in the automobile, asked the other occupants, including Pagonis, the other occupants being Scott Patterson, a New York State policeman, and Gene Branson, a utility worker, whether they had heard about a girl in a bag of feces. Now, this is more than 2 hours before Tawana was found. So, you know, if you look at Murder, She Wrote, or any of those programs, you know that only the kidnapper or rapist could have known that 2 hours before she was, in fact, found. And so then, beyond that, a postman came forward, by the name of Tim Losey. And Mr. Losey indicated that on the 28th of November, while he was carrying mail, he happened to observe an automobile with 4 white male occupants in it. Now, he gave a description of the car, he gave a description of the 4 male occupants. When Mr. Losey went down to appear before the grand jury, he was being questioned about the mail that the Brawleys were receiving after they left that residence for a new apartment in Wappinger Falls. And so he was telling them about when they would come by and pick it up, and et cetera, et cetera. And during the course of that, he volunteered that he in fact saw this automobile with 4 white men in it, and he basically said, you know, these men had to have been involved in anything that related to Tawana Brawley. And so the assistant district attorney who was questioning him remembered that Pagones had indicated that he and Chris were together, so he went to the state police file, and in the state police file there was a description of the car that Pagones was in. The description of that car matched the description of the car that was given by Tim Losey. Pagones said there were 4 white men in the car he was in. Tim Losey said there were 4 white men in the car that he saw. The only difference was Pagones claimed that they were en route to Danbury, Connecticut, and Tim Losey said, no, this car I saw was around the Pavilion complex. Well, now you got all these things developing. And so obviously at that particular time, you got to consider Harry Chris a suspect, and if Pagones had now admitted to being with him, you got to consider him a suspect as well.